Welcome to a ride on the outside. MMA is full of people on the inside, but what about the ones that watch from beyond? Welcome to the MMA Outsiders with Tom Albano and Zain Bando on the Empty the Bench Podcast Network.
All right, welcome everybody to another edition of the MMA Outsiders here on the Empty the Bench Podcast Network. That's Zain Bando. I'm Tom Albano, and well, we just came off of one big pay-per-view weekend, and now we're jumping right into another. Two different promotions, not the same area, but it's the Middle East, and two pretty epic main events coming off of one where we had 3 title fights, including the long-awaited comeback of Francis Ngannou, coming back in a big way. And then, of course, we got a UFC featherweight title fight. We've got Whittaker Chimaev somehow still. We'll talk about all that, plus a couple of little small news items here and there. It was a small news week. It's a lot of recap and preview this week.
Yeah, it certainly is a lot of recap and preview this week. And, as someone who is the manager of our famed UFC Picks Tracker document, it made me very sad to build the final tab, if you will, for the final UFC event of the year last week, which means we're slowly but surely getting towards the end of the madness that is the UFC schedule that seems to always be a living document, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, absolutely. Getting close to Halloween is less than 10 days away. 10 days when we're recording it, but less than 10 when we're broadcasting this. So it's getting to that time of the year that gets really exciting, at least in my household. But before we get into anything, make sure you hit that like button. Make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you get notified of everything here at the Empty the Bench Podcast Network. Make sure to follow us across social media, Twitter, or as Elon wants us to call it, X, Instagram and TikTok at MMA Outsiders ETB. Do the same for the Empty the Bench Podcast Network at ETB Network. Follow again the YouTube channel, youtube.com/ETB Network. Hit that subscribe button. Help us get to 900 subscribers. Help us get over the hump. Just like the Yankees got over the hump finally of the ALCS going to the World Series. I had to throw that in there. Yes, I absolutely did.
That's right. It's gonna be a ratings juggernaut for Fox the next week and a half. It's gonna be unbelievable. I just think Yankees Dodgers is poetic. It feels like we're living back. It feels
in the 50s again.
Yeah, it feels very weird. It was like a poetic time, like a series that should have took place a long time ago. So
for sure. And of course, if you don't want to watch us or you can't watch us on the video end, maybe you don't want to see our ugly mugs, take the Empty the Bench Podcast Network and the MMA Outsiders wherever you get your podcasts. Acast, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, so much more. Of course, YouTube Premium, if you somehow have that option, then you can watch on YouTube and just listen to us by turning the screen off. Of course, if you are listening, make sure to go to the YouTube end, hit that subscribe button again. And of course, the Empty the Bench Podcast Network. Everything here from the MMA Outsiders to our other shows, Bando's Breakdowns, Empty the Bench, ETB Sports. Everything here is presented by our good friends over at Playback. Watching sports is more fun with others, but we spend too much of our time watching alone. Playback is a virtual space where communities can stream live sports together with everyone perfectly synced up. Creators can hop on stage, deliver their own play-by-play analysis and commentary, and invite viewers up for Q&A. Playback makes watching sports fully interactive and a social experience. From playing fantasy sports, repping your favorite players and teams, and watching with the commentators and communities you care about. Win or lose, sports are best enjoyed together. Join our community by going to playback.tv/ETB Network to find out more, including our live stream schedule. First of all, let's get the important thing out of the way. Fight Study. It's a UFC pay-per-view week. It's Fight Study week. Thursday, I believe it's going to be about 3:30 Eastern, 3:30 or 4 o'clock Eastern. To be determined. I'm aiming for 3:30. If not, we'll be on it by 4. We're going to watch some old fights for Ilya Tapura. We're going to watch some old fights for Max Holloway. We'll break them all down, talk about them, preview them then. And then, I should say more importantly, if you're watching this during premiere time, at about 25 minutes or so, I'm going to be on the air on playback.tv/ETV Network for the start of the NBA season, NBA tip-off night. So you can join us for back-to-back, the 2 back-to-back games to kick off the NBA season. We got Knicks, Celtics, on at 7:30 Eastern. We'll start about 7:15 Eastern. We got for good old Ben Cruz here. His Celtics are gonna raise the banner, all receive their rings, and then they're gonna play the Knicks, who are newly loaded. And then, funny enough, we talk about newly loaded. A recent trade partner of the Knicks, the Minnesota Timberwolves, will be in the 10 o'clock Eastern game. Good old Pat Dana, producer Pat, and his Timberwolves. Hopefully, Pat will be there to take on the Lakers with the Jameses, LeBron and Bronny, making their professional NBA debuts together. Well, LeBron's been there, but it's the first time we're going to see this pairing in a regular season matchup.
Yeah, definitely another ratings bonanza on the NBA front. So you have nothing better to do. You like basketball, feel free to check out the stream. It should be a good one, especially when you got the NBA champs raising the banners. There's nothing bigger than that. So,
and then they got to play an arch rival. The Celtics-Knicks rivalry is going to heat up this season. Maybe the Knicks T-Wolves too. And hopefully for Pat's sake, maybe during the 10 o'clock portion, we'll get a little dosage of.
That's true. Very, 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 very good point.
All right. But let's talk about MMA. We're here to talk about MMA, and we're here to talk about UFC 308. So, I mentioned we'll talk about it on Thursday, too, on Fight Study, but let's break it down now. Why wait? UFC featherweight title on the line. Ilia Topuria, his first title defense after winning the championship off of that brutal knockout of Alex Volkanovski in February. He's defending his strap against the one and only, the legendary, the BMF, Max Holloway, coming off of his fight of the year with Justin Gaethje, probably the knockout of the year as well against Justin Gaethje at UFC 300. Max Holloway, of course, held the featherweight title, winning the interim strap against Anthony Pettis at the end of 2016. Then went on to become the undisputed champion off Jose Aldo at UFC, I think, 212 in June of 2017.
Then they rematched at UFC 218 in Detroit, which I was there for.
To be fair, that was a short notice fight as well.
Yep.
And then Holloway ultimately ends up losing the title to Volk at the end of 2019 at 245. Yep. And Holloway has been the consummate, we talk about him, and we're going to talk about the next in the co-main event, Robert Whittaker. The quadruple A fighters can beat everybody, else, but can't beat the champs. However, the person who was the roadblock for Max Holloway at featherweight, Alex Volkanovski, was knocked out by Topuria and has not fought since. So this is now Holloway's opportunity to reclaim the gold. Meanwhile, for Ilia Topuria's end, I mean, we talk about how much of a star he could be. We talked about that back in February after he won the title, and we said for you to become a star, I mean, Jose Aldo is Jose Aldo. I think Jose Aldo is going to be fighting for the championship anytime soon, but you'll have a Volk rematch at some point down the line, and then you got to win that. And before that, you got to win this fight with Holloway if you want to be that star. So, Zain, where are we at with this? Who has the most pressure on them? What's the most interesting storyline here, and who's ultimately going to win the fight?
First off, hasn't it felt like you and I have been excited about this fight for the last 8 months or something like that?
Well, we said when Holloway knocked out Gaethje, we said, that's it. Put him in the title fight.
Well, yeah, that's the fight we're getting. And, as you know, I'm a scholar of the MMA Twitterverse, if you will. There's been some pretty bold comparisons as to where this fight ranks amongst the levels, if you will, in UFC featherweight history. I see some people comparing this fight to the level of hype that's run to Jose Aldo versus Conor McGregor. I don't know if I would go that far, but it definitely feels like a very big fight, especially given the stakes of it, and especially given that this is now Holloway's fourth crack to try to win the belt he lost 5 years ago. This might be his last chance, because if you lose this one, featherweight is murderer's row, and would take a long time for him to get back there. So this is his golden opportunity to knock off the potential golden boy of Spain, if you will. Obviously, the UFC has potential plans to go there. Topuria is the champion. Holloway can put all of those issues to bed. And what I just think makes this fight so stylistically interesting is that these two are just they're literal bulls. They'll go in there and they'll just start swinging. I expect nothing but absolute fireworks from the second the fight starts until the second is over. There's going to be no feeling out process, no super clean technique unless it gets into a total boxing match. Or then I think Holloway has a chance to piece him up a little bit.
Well,
and then just to finish my thought though, and then third, I see little to no wrestling in this fight at all. I think it's strictly a striking clinic, and that's about it.
Well, did you see the recent comments to the recent exchange between the two of them, where basically Ilya challenged Max? Hey, what you did there, pointing to the center at the end of the Gaethje fight, let's just do it right at the start. And Max Holloway basically said it's the BMF baddest mother belt, not the dumbest mother belt.
No, and he's not wrong. And he even admitted to it in an interview with MMA Fighting, meaning Holloway, that Topuria has to earn the point down. He has to earn the moment for Holloway to grant him the point down to do that and start swinging. So it's clear that I think Holloway takes this a little bit more personally. I think that I wrote an article, you can check it out. It's MMA Knockout on Sports Illustrated off of that MMA Fighting interview that was just recently released with Holloway, where I basically talk about how Holloway is basically accusing Topuria of playing himself. I think we're gonna find out who the real player, quote unquote, is going to be Saturday afternoon in the States, and I feel like this is just one of those fights where you can't miss it. So I'm very much looking forward to it for sure. And I have firmly bought into the fact that Topuria has a chance to be one of the most massive stars in the sport moving forward, and he has nothing but time, given his undefeated stature and everything. But I feel like he's catching Max Holloway at the absolute wrong time. If he would have lost, if he would have lost to Justin Gaethje, I have a theory that Topuria would still be sitting on the sidelines, and I don't think featherweight would be as chronicled as it is right now going into this fight. So I think all the pressure is on Topuria, and I feel like Holloway has nothing to lose, and that's why I think he's going to fight a more open, freer type of fight because he knows the pressure's on the champ, given that his whole country is behind him. So
absolutely, I agree. And to that point, if you want my honest thoughts, I kind of agree with Holloway because you're right. Topuria has one of the biggest chances to become a massive star when it comes to you mentioned a whole country behind him, the UFC's plans for Spain. But I think, as Holloway said, he's feeling himself a little too much. He just got the title. He hasn't defended the title yet. And the common belief amongst a significant group of MMA fans that you are not truly a champion until you have defended the title.
I'm one of those people.
And you mentioned that a couple weeks ago when you were talking about I think it was Marab.
Yep.
So
that's correct.
I feel like you got to apply the same thing here. Topuria is taking on one of the most massive stars in this sport. And don't forget, you can say, well, Holloway won the championship in 2017. It was a while back. Number one, he's still competing at a top level. And number two, if you remember, he had his first UFC fight at 18? He wasn't even 20 years old.
He was 19.
He was 19 years old. He would be about a year or so older than me. So he's still in his early 30s. He's still got some prime left in him.
And no disrespect to Topuria, who just knocked out arguably in most people's eyes the greatest featherweight of all time. But no disrespect to Topuria. Holloway
was banged up. Volk was banged up.
No. I agree. The point I was trying to make was that Holloway's resume runs circles around Topuria's. You can't even compare it. He's fought a who's who, everybody, and then some. So
I think ultimately with this fight, well, number one, going back to my point, I'm not going to take anything away from the knockout. I mean, Volk took the fight. Volk took the fight. He knew the risk.
Right.
And he paid for it. And I know he's talking about, wanting to fight again. I would still, like I said, I want early 2025. I still want him to have a couple more months off. Just get into camp now. Because it was pretty brutal. And the fact that he was knocked out twice in 4 months, but that was neither here nor there. Let's talk about this fight. And I think those comments about throwing down and what you say about Max's boxing, I mean, Max is without question, and probably needless to be said about, if you're a more diehard MMA fan, one of the best boxers within the promotion.
I think
He
he's
is,
top 4.
yeah, absolutely. And it's not a matter of he hits you hard or he hits you quick. It's when he talks about volume. Number one, it's volume, and number two, he's actually the perfect blend of having volume and being a tactician. Because, like you said, like we talked about with the comments about the BMF DMF thing,
Right.
he is not going. I see Tapuri being more the type to rush in there because he's going to want to take control of the fight. He's going to want to bring it right to Holloway. Holloway is going to be smart.
I would expect nothing less than for him to do that. I would expect nothing less from Taporia and to rush in and to try to attempt something crazy.
Yeah, and the thing is, like, I expect Holloway to stand back. He is going to let Taporia throw everything that he needs to, bring all of his attack, and then Max is going to use counterpunching. I think Max's counter striking is excellent. I think he is going to, if Taporia goes into this fight and he is going to try for an early knockout like he did against Volkanovski. What he did against Volk is not going to work against Max, and Max is going to make him pay. And my concern is that's exactly what Taporia is going to do, especially given the high stakes nature of this fight and the pressure on his back.
I don't disagree with that for a second, which is why I believe, even though Taporia has championship experience, Max Holloway has a lot more octagon time, and I think the longer the fight goes, the more in favor is the former champion, which means I think gas tank is going to play a factor here. That's why I'm leaning more towards a 4th round TKO, because I think the only way Taporia can win is if he gets him out of there within the first 10 minutes. So
I completely agree. I know Max Holloway. I should clarify. Max has pressure on him too, because as you mentioned, if he loses to Taporia, he's probably not getting another shot for a while. If he loses to Taporia, he may have to consider a move to 155 and take on that murderer's row for any sort of chance at gold, because we've seen how drained he gets at 145. So he's not moving down to bantamweight. He'd have to move up.
Or if you think about it, Tom, he has the legacy to where if he retired this upcoming Sunday, he's a first ballot UFC Hall of Famer 1000%. So
yeah, that too. But having said that, this is going to be, how we do when we do football, I have the prove me right, prove me wrong picks.
Yeah.
This is going to be for a prove me wrong, because right now, and I'm not trying to be disrespectful anyway, but I need to see you, you talk about his status as, Volk's status as a GOAT of featherweight. Well, you have another GOAT right here. You did it once to a guy, who was a GOAT of MMA, granted maybe a little banged up. You got to do it again against the other GOAT. You have to.
Oh, for sure. And go ahead.
Sorry. Okay, and I agree with you. The gas tank. I don't think Holloway is going to slow down anytime soon. I'm not sure Taporia gets him in any trouble. And if I agree, that's going to be a striking fest, which means all of that leans in Holloway's favor. And I'm going to agree with you. 4th or 5th round TKO.
Yeah, and I just think the fight's going to go later because of the crazy pace that Holloway brings. I think even though it's not going to be as shocking, it's going to be very similar to Dillashaw Barao 1, or Dillashaw brutalized Barao for 20 minutes, and then with minutes to go in the 5th round, he finishes him. I could see it going literally the exact same way as that first fight all those years ago. It was probably about 10 years ago that fight took place now.
Yeah, 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm. But I could see it going very early, similar to that. I could see this also being a vintage Holloway performance.
I was actually going to make the comparison.
That goes back to like when he beat, you're going to go back to the fights when he beat Ortega and when he was on that long streak and when he beat Pettis and he had all of those title defenses where you just knew for a couple of years he was a shoo-in to beat whoever he fought.
Yeah. The Ortega fight's actually a perfect example of the kind of fight I think this is going to be like. I could even say if Taporia is not on his A game, this could end up like the Calvin Kattar fight.
That's bold. But hey, given
or at minimum the Arnold Allen fight.
Right, but hey, given Holloway's stature though, and the way he beat Calvin Kattar, I think he could do what he did to Calvin Kattar to Ilia Topuria in arguably a little bit more of a more brutal fashion. So you never know. All I know is for any bettors out there, whatever you do, don't take this fight to go the distance because you will lose. That's what I think. I was thinking about it as I started to look through the numbers of this fight, and I'm like, no, this doesn't make sense. This feels like a guaranteed finish.
Is the over under rate? Is it 2.5 rounds or 3.5?
I think it's 2.5.
2.5. Smash the over. Smash the over. that's
smash the over or smash a finishing prop.
Yeah, or both.
Yeah. Or both.
Co-main event. I'm surprised. Yeah, we mocked it. We said Chimaev was going to pull out at some point, but he hasn't. Here we are. Whitaker Chimaev co-main event. Pretty much a contenders fight here.
We're trying it again.
Yeah, obviously you've got Sean Strickland waiting in the wings, trying to get that rematch with Dricus du Plessis. But it all could ride on the layout of and the performances that go out in this one between the former champion and Whitaker and well, let's face it, a guy that the UFC has put another guy that he's put a lot of stock in Khamzat Chimaev. So, number one, Zain, does this fight still go down, or do you expect a pullout from Chimaev midweek? And number two, we talk about Whitaker also being a quadruple A fighter, and that he loses to the guys that he loses to end up being the champions of this sport in that weight class. Is Chimaev going to be one of those guys?
I don't know. That's a good question. To answer the questions you proposed to me, I would like to think that given this is in Abu Dhabi and given that they've tried to build this card around this co-main event in so many respects, you would hope that the fight still happens. So I'm going to say it does happen, but I just simply think that all of Khamzat Chimaev's health scares are going to catch up to him in a negative way, and I actually think he loses a very one-sided decision if the fight ends up happening, and I don't even think it's remotely close.
Wow, you're not even giving him a shot.
No, and I'm sticking with the same prediction I had in June. If you go back and listen to our analysis, it's on this fight from June before it was postponed. I think I told you directly that Whitaker would win a dominant decision, and I'm still sticking with it.
That's right, you did. I mean, it's tough because I want to believe in Khamzat Chimaev.
Now, if this was the Chimaev of 2 years ago, I think we would be having a bit of a different discussion. But given his inactivity and all the stuff that he's been through, I just don't know if I love him in this spot.
Yeah, I completely understand. And by the way, Tapology is very split on this one. 46-54 in favor of Whitaker. And kind of for the similar things that you had said, that the inactivity, the health issues, and just a lot of belief in Whitaker as well. Like I said, you look at those losses that he's had, since 2019. The only losses have been Israel Adesanya twice and Dricus du Plessis.
Yeah, and I'm sure that if Whitaker and du Plessis were to fight again, it would be a very different fight. So
the last time that Robert Whitaker lost to somebody that was not named Adesanya or du Plessis, you'd have to go back to February of 2014 when he was knocked out by Stephen Wonderboy Thompson.
When he was in a different weight class.
Exactly.
That's how good he is.
So
and to think that Stephen Wonderboy Thompson knocked him out, and given where his career went, he's obviously had his own ups and downs. That just makes it even more unreal in itself. So,
So this is actually going to be a prediction where I'm going to say wait till Saturday for my final prediction because I'm going back and forth. But
okay, it's the first time in months I've heard you say that.
Yeah, I have some uncertainty in this one because if you remember in my original prediction, I said I believe in Chimaev and he will get the job done and get a title shot. I'm actually going to express some doubt now, and I feel myself leaning over back to your side. I don't know if Chimaev, after given everything that's happened is ready for the top of the division.
Very, very interesting. And just to sort of piggyback off that, because we have to do mention it in some respect. This is the once a year card where we know we're going to get an earlier start time. So I just sort of wanted to ask you off the cuff: are you in favor of these earlier start times for pay-per-view? And do you think that this continued tradition of October Abu Dhabi is going to continue to live up to the hype as it has for the last 5 years?
If only to get a break from constantly ending work at 1 or 2 in the morning. Yes. Having Saturday nights free. Yes.
Very, very fair. And we've been lucky enough to get some good Abu Dhabi shows over the years. So hopefully this is another one that I guess takes the cake, if you will.
Yeah.
And again, as I just alluded to, I know we're not going to directly go through every single fight in the card, but is there another fight outside of the main or co-main event that you're
Ankalaev. I want to see what happens.
I'm curious as well because the entire light heavyweight division rides on it, and it's going to be even more interesting to see if he wins, if the UFC will actually pull the trigger, or if they won't do it.
Oh, are you suggesting still that if Ankalaev gets an early finish, that Bilal and Shavkat's going to get jumped by Pereira and Ankalaev?
No, I'm not suggesting that. What I'm suggesting is no matter how Ankalaev wins, some way the UFC just won't budge and won't give him the shot.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm fearing. Well, okay, I have one more question then with this fight, because you mentioned a decision. Does Robert Whittaker do enough in this fight? If you think he's going to win, I think actually first we agree. If Chimaev pulls this off, he's jumping Strickland for a title shot.
As unfair as it sounds,
yes.
In my opinion,
the UFC, it's Dana. You know how much they're pushing him.
No, of course.
Okay, now it comes to my other question, because your prediction was Whittaker. Does Whittaker do enough to jump Strickland, or does the UFC still go, Strickland is holding out. He says, I'm not fighting again until I get my rematch. He's pulling the Stipe. What's going to happen?
I mean, I think in this scenario, you can't deny Whittaker if he beats Chimaev, and if he does it impressively.
Fair enough.
And I understand there's the argument for Strickland, but I think given how we both feel about DDP, I feel like he'll hold the belt for enough time to where the rematch will always be there. So at least for the rematch window will be open for at least the next year.
It also goes to something we also talk about with Strickland. The resumes. I mean, Whittaker's resume, as much as Strickland was a recent champ and controversially lost the title, Whittaker's resume runs laps around Strickland's.
And he's just simply had better overall fights in his career. And he's done it across 2 divisions. I bet, even though welterweight was brief, it still has to count for something.
Absolutely. All right. So now we talk about a card that's happening in Abu Dhabi this weekend. Let's talk about a card that happened in Saudi Arabia this past weekend. Surprise, surprise, the king is back. No, not Conor McGregor, Francis Ngannou. And, I mean, he just looked great. I mean, Zed, my heart swelled up in excitement to see Francis Ngannou have the performance that he did. After everything that he went through last year he fumbled the bag, the fight with Fury, controversially losing that, getting embarrassed by Joshua, losing his son, just every single thing that he went through since leaving the UFC. I think it all has played out and has all paid off for Ngannou here, winning in less than 4 minutes, 90 seconds left, absolutely destroying Ferreira. I mean, not destroying, but towards that point where he was just basically laying it in. I think that fight was stopped way too soon. Mergliot, his eyes were in the back of Ferreira's eyes were in the back of his head as he was on the ground, just laying there. I don't know what they were doing, but I feel good.
Wait, are you saying it was stopped too early or stopped too late?
Too late.
Okay.
Too late.
Okay.
Basically, my point is, I feel great for Francis Ngannou after all this.
Yeah, I mean, simply put, the lineal heavyweight champion did what the lineal heavyweight champion is supposed to do. he still believes he's the king of the castle. He had to go prove it against the guy that was being built as the scariest heavyweight that the PFL had ever discovered, if you will, and it was nothing short of a masterful one-sided performance. I mean, the only thing I can say is Francis Ngannou is playing with house money right now, and he could do whatever he wants, and I don't think people would be disappointed.
And I think that's ultimately the next question now is what happens next with Francis Ngannou, because obviously Ryan Bader ended up losing to Ferreira for Ferreira to get this fight. But I mean, that fight's still there with the PFL champ versus the Bellator champ. I mean, PFL Super Fights champ now, I should say, versus a Bellator champ. Although you got Vadim Nemkov, who's moved up to heavyweight, and the potential of
that's a fight that I would like to see, given that I've obviously
how
followed.
Nemkov beat him at light heavyweight.
Yeah. That would be interesting. And then I know, well, now with Saudi Arabia involved, I still think if he wants it, there's the 0.001% chance that the Jones fight is still there. So
hold on, I'm getting a phone call. Hello? Yes, it's Dana White. He's telling you you're out of your mind and you're a moron.
Yeah, that's fair. I probably am in that regard. A man can dream, though.
Don Davis is still dreaming.
No, it's true. This is the modern day version of Lesnar versus Fedor, the fight that everybody wanted to see, but the fight that
nobody is going to get. But that brings a question.
Okay.
And, I'm trying to keep my neutrality here, although I do have that, loyalty to the PFL. I mean, who does PFL have to match up with Francis Ngannou next?
Well, if you want my brutally honest opinion, I don't think it's very many, Tom, unfortunately.
Well,
at least very many from a pay-per-view perspective.
The one advantage that they do have is they're going to have a little bit of time, because Francis Ngannou is going to be leading the charge on the PFL Africa promotion that's starting next year. So obviously his efforts are going to be focused on that to start the year. He's not going to probably return to action right away, be it boxing or MMA. So they're gonna have a little bit of time.
Yeah, I don't disagree. The big issue that I do see with it, though, is if the PFL is going to really try to get into the pay-per-view business, Francis is going to have to fight names that people know. And I'm not saying that Renan Ferreira wasn't a name that people knew. I just felt like, I don't know if you felt this way, but just overall coverage-wise, it seems like most of the outlets, the ones that I am with included, we probably didn't hammer this fight the way we should have, simply because we just kind of didn't think that the MMA fan base didn't fully care about it. So Francis fought someone, that people could resonate with, or people knew from a hardcore perspective. I think it could sell a little bit more. I would be down to see a Ryan Bader Francis Ngannou fight. I would be down to see Francis Ngannou versus Vadim Nemkov, because Vadim Nemkov is a homegrown talent that dominated another weight class. I would be open to seeing a potential crossover. No matter what the promotion is, I would also be open to seeing Francis Ngannou go back to boxing, because I think he's more than shown that he's competitive. So
I mean, I guess ultimately the question now is, I mean, for me, by the way, it's really hard for me to judge promotion, because I know some people talked about lack of promotion, but if you watch any PFL card, how many times did they air commercials throughout the summer for this card?
At least 11 times a show on average.
How many? And maybe it's just me, because a lot of my content that I watch on social media is MMA based, but I feel like anytime I scrolled through it, I always saw an advertisement for this card. So
right.
I can't really join the community that's saying, oh, lack of promotion. Like, it was everywhere, for at least on my feed.
No, for sure. I just think more so from
about an opponent of sorts.
Well, yeah, about an opponent also, but from a more casual audience perspective. Like, for instance, like besides the people in our internal group chat that we're all in, none of my friends know who Renan Ferreira is. So
Fair.
Whereas, in comparison to like a Tom Aspinall, Ryan Bader, or John Jones, someone that's more globally recognized, if you will, that's more of what I was trying to get at with that.
I mean, that's fair. As far as the boxing end, I mean, Anthony Joshua just really got embarrassed by Daniel Dubois, so a rematch there is open, but I don't know if Francis does that after the way he lost in one-sided fashion.
I don't think he would.
I know he's also not been on the right track, and I'm not exactly sure what's next for him, but Wilder. You fought Fury, you fought Joshua, you might as well maybe complete the threesome.
Wilder would be a box office pay-per-view, and you could put Wilder in there in any condition that Wilder's in, and people would still care about that.
I think honestly that might be where I lean next. A boxing match with Wilder. I think, and I talked about it when Wilder lost his fight to Zain. I think the Francis fight is really the only option out there right now in terms of big money draw.
So paint a scenario for me. Do you think there's any possible way this Jones fight could be salvaged, or do you think simply because Jones can't get out of his UFC contract,
Jones can't get out of his UFC contract? PFL has invested a bleep ton of money into Francis Ngannou. It's never happening unless Dana White, miraculously decides to do a crossover. It's not happening.
Yeah, I don't disagree. So wait, that leads me to my next question. Do you believe that Francis Ngannou at the present moment, even with the Jones-Stipe fight coming up, do you think he's the best heavyweight in the world?
I still recognize him as one of, if not the best heavyweight. I mean, if we're talking about lineal, to quote Ric Flair, to be the man, you know what you have to do?
You have to beat the man.
I wasn't ready for the sound there. There you go. You have to beat the man. And so far, nobody has beat the man. The only thing that's beat the man so far is contract negotiations.
Right.
So I got.
And the only thing that's beaten John Jones so far is an incompetent referee and law enforcement.
And drugs.
Right.
That being said, I feel like, and with John Jones, you're only going off of one heavyweight fight. So we can talk about considering John Jones the GOAT as Dana wants us to, but for heavyweight, I mean, I'd still put Stipe above him, but Francis.
Yeah, I would say if Stipe somehow knocks out Jones, it further justifies your argument that Francis is still the best heavyweight in the world.
I know, and I think in terms of the all-time, what troubles Francis is the lack of activity over the last few years.
And the lack of common opponents between all the other fighters.
Correct. Although taking that lack of activity in MMA, if we're going to include boxing there is something for him. Obviously, we talk about Fury not taking that fight seriously, but he knocked down and almost beat at the time WBC heavyweight champion.
I think the key word there is almost. Had he beaten him somehow, I think it would have been taken into a different category, if you will.
Yeah. So I mean, you talk about before the show, who are the horsemen of heavyweight? Obviously, you got Jones, who, as much as people hate it, is the current heavyweight champion. You have Stipe, who is the only guy in UFC history to win the heavyweight championship on more than one occasion and successfully defend it at least 3 times. You have Francis Ngannou, who, again, lineal champion. You have Aspinall, but I can't. If we're talking about activity, he probably is number 1 in the UFC at minimum, or even in MMA in minimum, considering Francis's lack of activity. But number 1, he's an interim champ, not a full-time champ. We can debate about his belt versus Jones' belt all we want, but I don't know if Tom is just getting started on his championship journey. No, I don't know if I would put him above a Randy Couture. I love, maybe part of it's because I love Randy so much, but if we're talking about 4 horsemen of heavyweight, if you want to throw Jones there, fine. If you want to throw Francis there, fine. If you want to throw
I'm more so meant by 4 horsemen. I want to clarify, all time I get you shouldn't have him here, but the the current four horsemen right now, he has to be
The current, because obviously Randy's way long retired. But if we're talking about all time, I don't know if I'm ready to put Aspinall there yet. My point being, I'm interested to see what happens next with Francis. I think that's the big question.
I mean, I would be open to seeing this rematch personally if the PFL can't find anything else.
Fair enough. I think, though, for PFL's next pay-per-view, maybe a little bit of a controversial take, but there is somebody who they also signed around the time that Francis had signed that's, for a lack of a better term, people are disgusted by it, but big star. And that's a guy who's going to be fighting in a boxing match next month. I feel like for the PFL's next pay-per-view, you got to try and get Jake Paul into his MMA debut at some point in 25.
Do you think he would literally fight him, though?
No. I'm not saying a specific opponent. I'm just saying you have to, for a next pay-per-view.
Like together on the same.
Yeah. And I wouldn't do it as a main event. I don't know. Actually, I don't know if I do as a main event. Probably not. But even as a co-main, my point being, 2024 for the PFL, you got Francis in the cage. You got Cyborg in the cage. We'll talk about it right now. But 25, you got it. For better or for worse, whether you like him or not, his audience not, you have to get Jake Paul in the cage for his MMA debut.
The big question is going to be, and this is for really another discussion, but I guess to end on this point, the big question is going to be, is Jake Paul's MMA debut, it has to be the right opponent. Otherwise, nobody will care.
Which means either you got to do all you can to get Nate Diaz under contract somehow, even if just for one fight to do this, or, speaking of Tom Aspinall, Tommy Fury was just training with Tom Aspinall last month and said, I'd be willing to do a rematch with Paul in the cage instead of the boxing ring.
I would actually be down to see that. That would be one that I think people would wake up for, if you will, and happily watch, because I think an MMA fight between those two goes differently than a boxing match.
Absolutely. So that's my 2 cents. All right, let's talk about Cyborg, because she deserves some attention for the way that she performed against Lisa. But first of all, shout out to these two, because this was probably one of, if not the best fight of the night. But the way that those two laid into each other, bloodied up each other inside the cage. And Chris Cyborg, I mean, what has not been said already? She goes over to Strikeforce and beats Gina Carano, gets women's MMA further on the map. She goes over to Invicta after Strikeforce closes down, wins their championship. The UFC signs her and makes a whole promotion, a whole division for her. She wins that championship and ends up having one of the most legendary women's MMA bouts of all time against Amanda Nunes, who's still, by the way, the only person, only one of two people to defeat Chris Cyborg. Then, after all that fallout with the UFC, goes over to Bellator, wins their championship, beats Julia Budd, who no women's featherweight fighter there had been able to figure out. And now she goes and takes on the PFL's best women's fighter after Kayla Harrison left for the UFC, and she scores the decision there. Five promotions, 5 championships. I mean, Zain, at this point, you're even an Amanda Nunes person, a Chris Cyborg person, but at this point, it's 1-2 or 1A, 1B. There's nothing else to say at this point.
Yeah, it's well said. It's almost like in baseball with you're either on the side of the Red Sox or the side of the Yankees. It's the same thing as the Chris Cyborg Amanda Nunes argument.
It's like with best player in baseball, in terms of like MVP overall. It's like this year. Speaking of, we talk about World Series and their team. You're either an Aaron Judge guy or a Shohei Ohtani guy.
That's right. And I feel like where I lean. I'm more on the side of Nunes, considering that she beat Cyborg in their head-to-head fight. So that's what I would base it off of. But you can't deny that she is, if not the best women's MMA fighter of all time. The consensus, at the very least, and it can't be anything lower than this, the consensus number 2, what she's done has been absolutely masterful. And I don't care that some of her competition wasn't the best competition in the world. If it wasn't for her and for some of the these other women, Amanda Nunes and Ronda Rousey included. You could even throw Misha Tate and Marvelous Conan in there. If it isn't for those 5 or 6 women, women's MMA would not be where it is today, and it begins and ends. Well, and one of them begins and ends with Cyborg too. So
absolutely, and I think actually, Zan, going back to what we talked about with Francis and the idea of a crossover sub, this victory just further shows, it's kind of a shame that we never are going to get that rematch between Chris Cyborg and Amanda Nunes.
But hey, don't count out if the money is right. Do you think that Kaylee Harrison would be down to welcome Chris Cyborg back to the UFC? Because I think a lot of people would love to see that fight.
Obviously, again, I would love to see that fight. They're all in the same class, and I would love to see that fight. But a certain bald-headed CEO of the UFC is never going to let a crossover happen.
I don't know. He's let crossovers happen before, so
and it hasn't happened since Chuck Liddell lost in Pride.
That's technically true, but he did other crossovers too, like when James Toney fought Randy Couture.
You know why he did that?
No, I know. It was to prove a point that MMA was superior to boxing.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, I love Chris Cyborg. She said that she has 3 fights left, and this was the first. She's going to look to do 2 more fights. So what do you expect? I expect she's going to make 1 more defense of the Bellator championship, whether it's against somebody in her league or not.
Who do you think she fights?
Well, aren't we coming off of a card for Bellator? I think the last card was London last month.
Yeah. So do you think she would fight Sarah Collins?
I mean, I would say Leah McCourt, but considering the way she lost to Sarah, who else but at this point?
That's what I'm kind of thinking.
I think it's going to be her. The 2 fights are going to be her defending the championship against Sarah Collins to close out her reign as Bellator champion. And then she's obviously going to be looking for something big for her final fight, but I don't know who that would be because Amanda's retired, and if she comes back, she's probably going back to the UFC to get something for their women's bantamweight division, not featherweight. Kayla Harrison's under contract to the UFC. Ronda's long retired. Gina's long retired and too much a controversial figure. Who's left?
I would say really nobody, but riding off into the sunset.
I mean, unless she's going to defend her title twice instead. It's Collins and then whoever else gets the opportunity.
Right. I think that's more so up to her. Because if it was me, she could retire tomorrow and I would be totally okay with it.
Probably. I agree with that.
So, and this is no disrespect to Larissa Pacheco, because Larissa Pacheco is a good fighter, but she was weighing over her head.
I think she competed well. I think she took a round or 2.
No, I know. I just mean leading up to the fight. I think she was in a little bit over her head that she thought that maybe she caught Cyborg at the right time to try to win this
She
one.
did hurt Cyborg on a couple of occasions. She did leave those bloody marks around her eyes that got scared. Like, is the doc going to step in?
That's true, but to me, they weren't enough for me to say, "Oh, she was on the verge of finishing her" or anything.
Oh, well, actually, maybe that's the last fight. Maybe a rematch with Pacheco. Worst comes to worst.
That makes sense. I think you would need to give Pacheco 1 more fight before giving her that opportunity again.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I could see that.
And it just remains to be seen what PFL is gonna do with their women's division for next season, because we went from lightweight, then 23 was featherweight, and 24 was flyweight. Are they gonna stick with flyweight? Are they gonna introduce another weight class for women? Are they gonna change the weight class again back to featherweight or light? It remains to be seen.
Yeah, it does.
So we'll see.
I was going to say, if you don't know yet, there's a good chance that I don't know yet either. So
I don't know yet. Could you imagine if Chris Cyborg swerves us all and says, "You know what? For my retirement tour, I'm going to do." PFL brings back women's featherweight. Says, "You know what? For my retirement tour, I'm going to compete in the PFL season."
That would be interesting. Or maybe if she decides to go to Japan or do something crazy over there, that would be weird.
You know what? Maybe that's the last fight. Maybe we see her do something crazy with Ryzen or something.
That would be interesting. She seems to me like the kind of person that would want to fight on New Year's Eve anyway. So
I could see that. Maybe we'll get the opportunity to talk to her one of these days again to kind of pick her brain a little bit.
it's a good thought. Yeah, absolutely.
One other fight, by the way, because we did have a Bellator title fight on Battle of the Giants, and Johnny Eblin, I mean, Zain, what else to say? But he dominated this fight. He used his wrestling. I know it wasn't an exciting fight, but Johnny Eblin fought a smart fight, and once again, he just continues to show he's probably the best fighter that's not signed by the UFC, and just arguably maybe is up there. You know, you could rank him. It's not taboo to say above Drickus or Rob or Strickland for a best middleweight in the world.
It's a smart fight, but I'm going to be brutal and say that it was a snooze fest. I didn't enjoy the fight at all, and I think it further solidifies the point that that to me the UFC is the best middleweights in the world. And I'm not saying that Eblin wouldn't be competitive if he went over to the UFC, because he would.
Oh, I would. Let me clarify this. I'm not saying that Eblin has great challengers in Bellator. I'm just saying but that's the point, that he's a class above everybody else in Bellator.
Yeah, I could totally see that. And to be fair, this is no disrespect to Fabian Edwards, but when you're the consensus best middleweight not signed to the UFC, and I understand it was really his only option, that's not a fight that screams, okay, you've really made it on a level to where everybody wants to see you fight. And this is no disrespect to him. It's simply the current state of the roster at the moment, that there's just not a middleweight in a division, at least that I can think of right now, that can even remotely compete against him. So as you just alluded to, I think he's I think he's in a class of his own, if you will. And if he does get signed to the UFC, I think it would be very, very interesting. So
for sure. All right, we gotta move on. So let's talk about the UFC with UFC Vegas 99. You were brutally honest with the last fight, so I will be brutally honest here. Michel Pereira looked terrible, god awful. Like, honestly, it was. I get his thing is he's gonna try to give a blitz to his opponent in the opening minutes and see if his opponent can weather the storm. But Fluffy, I mean, was able to do that and then some. And then when you consider Pereira, you know, what happened afterwards, he just had nothing. He was easily grounded. He was easily dominated. I'm surprised the fight lasted as long as it did, stretching into the fifth round for a fifth round TKO. And just, it was just really, really bad. It was a brutally one-sided fight. I did not, for clarification, did not look at the official scorecards, so maybe this actually happened, but it was very realistic to say that there could have been multiple 10-8 rounds in this one. And what this tells me, like, I get it. Pereira was on the 10-fight win streak. I got fooled. I thought, you know, maybe against ranked competition he would be okay, but hook, line, and sinker, I got fooled. And honestly, Michel Pereira, we're recording this before the new UFC rankings comes out. Michel Pereira needs to be dropped off the rankings and then some. Brutal point, case in point, he is not ready for ranked competition with the skill set that he has right now, if this is what he's going to continue to do.
No, he certainly doesn't. And you had just alluded to it. It's they're going to go too. And something that I think was interesting is before the finish, let's see, Ron McCarthy scored the fight 40-35. Very clearly had it 39-34, and Gartwich had it 40-35. So it was pretty clear who the judges were leaning towards if the fight had gone to a decision. Had the fight not ended by TKO. So
yeah, I mean, that's a fight that honestly you could have stopped after the fourth round. It looked terrible. It was really a one-sided fight. Now, to Fluffy's credit, the fact that he beat Pereira in such a fashion, that's going to do him wonders. That's going to put him probably against a top 10 ranked opponent next.
Right. Oh, by the way, in round 3, because you were referencing it,
Yeah.
Ben Cartledge and Derek Cleary scored round 3 at 10-8 for Hernandez, but round 2, on Ron McCarthy's scorecard was a 10-8, and his round 3 was a 10-9. So
judging,
I don't get it. They're throwing out 2 of the judges get the 10-8 right, and the other one throws the 10-8
in a different round.
It doesn't add up. So
don't you love MMA judging in 2024?
I certainly don't.
Neither do I.
At least now I know that the official. I just learned something. I've watched MMA for a long time, and now I know this. The official UFC website. This is a public service announcement for anyone who needs it. The official UFC website actually does update up to the second real time scorecards from the judges as soon as they're posted. So this is very good. I didn't know this.
Well, the UFC, I think it's the UFC News Twitter account always puts them out.
That's right, yeah. So yeah, going before the finish, the scorecards were 40-35, 39-34, and 40-35 in favor of Hernandez. So
wait. 39-34?
Yep.
Did one of those judges give Pereira round 1?
Yes, Derek Cleary did give Michelle Pereira round 1. Yep.
How?
I don't know.
How?
I don't know.
Hold on. Seriously. How are we doing this in 2024? How are we having this?
I don't know.
This judging is atrocious. But you know what Dana White finds more atrocious? The people who are ranking the UFC rankings, even though some of those people, remember when those names were public and we're like, wait a minute, this guy hasn't done anything. This guy hasn't ridden for MMA in several years. So he now wants to introduce artificial intelligence into the UFC ranking system.
The rankings are so bad that I could probably do them by myself and be the only person on the panel. I
will still be called morons by Dana White.
Well, who knows? With this is the truth to myself, but with the way my personality is, I think I would be the last person to be called a moron. But you never know. So,
but yeah, you know what's going to happen here. He's going to introduce this next week or the week after, right before 309 comes out, and oh, surprise! John Jones is number 1 pound for pound again.
Yeah, that probably will happen.
Again, can we please officially clarify? You know, we're not disagreeing with Dana about all time. That's number 1. All time and pound for pound are not...
They're not mutually exclusive.
Exactly.
They're not mutually exclusive. Which, by the way, do you or do you not agree with Dana White? His thoughts on Clear Country that he should be higher than 8th in the light heavyweight division?
He entered that fight ranked 8th, right?
Yeah, and he stayed at number 8.
I feel like maybe it's not the biggest concern in the world as much as he would want you to believe.
No.
I would like if he had maybe moved up to 7 the way he performed against Pereira.
I think you could justify having him move up to number 6, but I would say him staying at 8 was 100% incorrect.
I'll agree with that. I would have moved him up to 6 or 7 just to give him points, because that was a performance where, you know,
and he was winning the fight before he was knocked out.
Right.
So
it was the first time, it was the second time in the UFC that we've had to see Alex Pereira pull off a comeback. The first time, of course, was when he beat Izzy.
Right, exactly.
So something has to be rewarded there.
Right. 100%.
The other news item from this week that didn't have to do with one of the pay-per-views, UFC 312 has officially been announced. It will take place Super Bowl weekend. We're getting another weekend where we're going to get the UFC pay-per-view on Saturday and the Super Bowl on Sunday. Oh, I was so sad we didn't get this last year, and now I am so happy we're getting this year. I love this kind of weekend.
Yeah, I love this kind of weekend too. The last time this happened, I was in Arizona the week of that Super Bowl covering the media events. My one night off, I went to the movie theater to watch UFC, so I'm very familiar with how this weekend
I remember
goes down,
that.
if you will.
I remember when you were doing that.
Yep.
But basically, 311 is still targeted for California in January. So the assumption right now is that UFC Fight Night in Saudi Arabia, February 1st, it's going to be a fight night. So once again, unless Conor McGregor is going to be headlining a UFC Fight Night event, or there's going to be something weird that happens with the UFC number pay-per-view scheduling, we're left asking this question once again.
Why the fuck you lying? Why you always lying? Oh my God. Stop you fucking lying.
And I will never believe a word.
Well, to be fair, the entire internet wrote about it for at least a week. So,
well, again, when I wrote about it with heavy skepticism. And so, once again, I will never believe a word that comes out of Conor McGregor's mouth.
Yeah, I think most people feel very similarly to you. All I know is that, actually, this even further helps your argument because Dana White went on the Out of Pocket podcast with RG3 at the time that we're recording this. It was released 8 hours ago, and he said, without saying a date, that he believes Conor McGregor will fight in 2025, but did not say who or when. So this just goes to show that this is all smoke and mirrors.
It's one of two things, or actually three things. It's number one, drunk Conor McGregor once again at a BKFC event, being a promoter, talking out of his ass. Number two,
which he kind of was, considering that Hooker admitted in a later interview that he had verbally agreed to it.
It's on Submission Radio.
Yeah.
Number two, the UFC again going with their negotiations. No, because they don't want Conor McGregor out of his UFC contract. Or three, a mix of both.
Or four, this is a fight that's in the works. We just don't know when it's going to happen.
So, but again, as I have always said with Conor, Zain, I'll believe it when I see it. I'll believe it when he puts his 2 feet in the octagon ready for a fight.
And speaking of believing it when we see it, I guess we'll believe it when we see it when Hamza Chimaev steps on the scale on Friday before his fight with Robert Whittaker.
Let's just hope the Nate Diaz pay-per-view bonanza doesn't happen again on weigh-in day.
Let's hope. Otherwise, we'll have to be scrambling to do an update to the update and to say that the first half of our episode doesn't mean anything anymore. So
let's hope we don't get there. Make sure that like button, subscribe, hit the notification bell so you get notified of everything here at the Empty the Bench Network. Again, subscribe to us here on YouTube, youtube.com/ETB Network. Help us get to 900 and eventually 1,000 subscribers. Make sure to take the MMA Outsiders wherever you get your podcasts, on the road with you, on Acast, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, so much more. And shout out to our friends over at Playback. The NBA is back. Check out our schedule at playback.tv/ETB Network for the latest NBA games that we're going to be broadcasting there. And of course, Fight Study this Thursday afternoon. So be there. Either 3:30 or 4 o'clock Eastern time. Be there.
Be there. Be square. Until then, he's Tom. I'm Zain. We hope you have a great rest of your week. We hope you enjoy UFC 3. You can wait for Abu Dhabi this Saturday. Again, you can pick that up on ESPN Plus pay-per-view. And before we get out of here, we just wanted to remind you, be Joe Pyfer.
Rama.